Ladies and gentlemen, what if one moment of humiliation could unravel $1 million empire? Welcome to Story Sphere, where we bring you tales that turn the tables on injustice. Picture this: a wrecked Ferrari, a mocking billionaire, and a 72-year-old man who's about to change everything. Ready for a story that'll leave you speechless? Let's dive in. I'll give you the Ferrari if you can get it to run. Jonathan Blackwell's laughter echoed across the luxury car dealership's courtyard as he pointed to a completely wrecked red Ferrari, lying in the corner of the parking lot like a monument to failure. Walter Johnson, 72, had come there just to pick up his granddaughter, who worked as a receptionist. But when his old Ford pickup broke down right in front of the entrance to Blackwell Luxury Motors, the real estate billionaire didn't miss the opportunity to turn the moment into his own personal entertainment. "Look, everyone," Blackwell shouted to the salespeople and customers who began to gather around. "This gentleman here seems to know a thing or two about cars, doesn't he?" Sarcasm dripped from every word as he watched Walter try to start his 1998 pickup truck. The Ferrari in question was a 2019 model that had been completely destroyed in an accident. Blown engine, bent chassis, fried electrical system. It was literally a pile of red metal that Blackwell kept as a trophy from the time he successfully sued the young heir who had destroyed it in an illegal race. 5 mechanics have already said it's impossible to fix this machine, Blackwell continued, now filming with his cell phone for his social media. "But I'm sure someone with your experience can figure it out, right?" Walter slowly got out of the pickup truck, his calm eyes scanning the wrecked Ferrari. The laughter around him grew louder when they noticed his calloused hands and simple work clothes. What none of them could see was the glimmer of recognition that passed through the old man's eyes as he observed specific details in the wreckage. "Sir," Walter said in a calm voice. "May I take a closer look?" Sure, Blackwell was almost crying with laughter. "You can even get inside if you want. Just be careful not to hurt yourself on the metal." As Walter approached the Ferrari, completely ignoring the laughter and malicious comments, something in his posture changed. His fingers lightly touched the dented hood, and for a brief moment, an almost imperceptible smile crossed his face. What Blackwell and his privileged audience didn't know was that those calloused fingers had built much more than they could ever imagine. And if you're loving this twist, hit that subscribe button for Story Sphere, because what happened next turned that afternoon of humiliation into something none of them would ever forget. The humiliation that Blackwell had planned as a 5-minute show turned into a cruel spectacle that lasted over an hour. Other customers at the dealership stopped to film, sharing it on social media with hashtags like #OldmanTryingToBeMechanic and #FerrariImpossible. "Everyone, check this out," Blackwell shouted to a growing audience. 30 minutes in, and he still believes he can do it. What admirable determination. Laughter echoed across the lot as Walter continued to meticulously examine each component of the wrecked Ferrari. Walter's granddaughter, Rebecca, had left for lunch and had not yet returned. No one there knew that she worked at the front desk, which made the situation even more delightful for Blackwell. He was humiliating a complete stranger without any social consequences. "You know what impresses me the most?" Blackwell continued, now broadcasting live on Instagram to his 200,000 followers. "The confidence. Look at him, completely focused, as if he really knows what he's doing. It's almost touching, don't you think?" Walter had carefully removed the control panel, completely ignoring the comments. His hands moved with a precision that began to bother some of the more attentive observers. These weren't the movements of someone trying to guess. They were the confident gestures of someone who knew exactly where each component should be. "Hey, old man," shouted one of the salesmen, Ryan, encouraged by the laughter. "My dad owns a bike shop. I can get you a job there if this doesn't work out." The joke was met with thunderous approval, but Walter didn't even look up. At 72, he had learned that dignity lay not in the words he spoke, but in the actions he took. And at that moment, his actions were telling a story that none of them were prepared to hear. What the privileged audience couldn't know was that Walter Johnson had spent 45 years of his life working on something far more complex than luxury cars. While Blackwell accumulated inheritances and manipulated real estate contracts, Walter had devoted 4 decades of his life to a kind of precision that transformed ordinary metal into engineering miracles. 45 minutes, Blackwell announced, consulting his Rolex ostentatiously. Impressive. People usually give up at 10. Such persistence. It was then that Walter finally spoke, without taking his eyes off the engine. "Mr. Blackwell, may I ask you a question?" Blackwell's laughter faltered for a moment. How did this man know his name? "Have you ever built anything with your own hands?" Walter continued, now looking directly at him. "Something that existed only in your imagination and had to become real through your work?" The question caught Blackwell off guard. I built a real estate empire," he replied, trying to regain control of the situation. "No," Walter said softly. "That's not building. That's buying." An awkward silence fell over the group. There was something in Walter's voice, a quiet authority that didn't match the image of a helpless victim that everyone had created. Each new attempt at humiliation only revealed more about the true nature of these two people, one who had built his life on appearances and inherited privilege, and another who had shaped the world with his own hands, one piece at a time, over decades of quiet, dedicated work. 2 hours had passed when Walter asked for a specific screwdriver. "Phillips, number 2, with an insulated handle," he said without looking up from the engine. The precision of the request made Ryan, the salesman, stumble over his words. I don't know if we have that here." "Drawer 3 of the red bench, second shelf," Walter replied calmly. "Next to the Torx keys." An awkward silence fell over the group. How did this man know exactly where to find tools in a workshop he had never visited before? Blackwell tried to regain control of the situation with a forced laugh. "Impressive. You must have worked in many workshops to know the standard organization so well." But something in his voice had changed. His absolute confidence was beginning to waver. It was then that Rebecca Johnson arrived from lunch and saw the crowd gathered in the courtyard. Recognizing her grandfather Walter at the center of the commotion, her face paled. She had worked there for 2 years and knew Blackwell's cruel nature all too well when he found an easy target. "What's going on here?" Rebecca asked, pushing her way through the onlookers. An employee?" Blackwell exclaimed, not making the connection. "Come and see. Your friend here is trying to repair a Ferrari that 5 expert mechanics have declared a total loss." Rebecca swallowed hard. She knew exactly who her grandfather was, but she also knew that revealing that at that moment could put her job at risk. She decided to watch silently, trusting in the wisdom Walter had demonstrated throughout her life. Meanwhile, Walter had managed to access the Ferrari's main electrical system. His hands moved with a precision that began to cause real discomfort in some observers. These were not trial-and-error movements. They were the confident gestures of someone who understood perfectly what he was doing. "Do you know what the problem is?" Walter said, finally addressing Blackwell directly. "This engine wasn't destroyed in an accident. It was sabotaged." The word "sabotaged" caused a restless murmur among those present. Blackwell laughed, but for the first time, the sound rang false. "Sabotaged? What imagination!" "It was a documented accident, investigated by the police," Blackwell continued. "Of course it was investigated," Walter replied, now removing a specific component from the engine. "But whoever investigated it didn't know to look for the right signs. Look here. This wire was cut on purpose, then burned to look like overheating. And here," he pointed to a metal part, "twist marks that only appear when someone forces a manual brake." The audience leaned in to get a better look. Even to the untrained eye, the evidence Walter pointed out was unquestionable. Someone had indeed destroyed that Ferrari on purpose in a meticulous and calculated manner. "This is ridiculous," Blackwell exploded, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. "You can't prove any of this." Walter smiled for the first time that afternoon, not a mocking smile, but one of someone who had finally found all the pieces of a complex puzzle. "Actually, I can. Every engine has a unique signature of wear and tear. And when you work with high-performance engines long enough, you learn to read those signatures like fingerprints." Want to know how this unraveling exposed a massive fraud? Stay with Storysphere, because this story's about to take a jaw-dropping turn. Rebecca felt her heart race. She knew that her grandfather had worked for 4 decades as chief engineer of Ferrari's racing engine division in Italy before retiring and moving to the United States to be closer to his family. But more importantly, she knew that Walter had personally designed the engine for that particular Ferrari. "Sir," Walter said, looking Blackwell straight in the eye. "May I ask you a question about the insurance you received for this Ferrari?" The color drained from Blackwell's face. How could this man know about the insurance? What the privileged audience couldn't imagine was that Walter Johnson wasn't just repairing a wrecked Ferrari. He was carefully unraveling a $1 million fraud, piece by piece, with the same precision he had used to create hundreds of engines throughout his career. And each new discovery brought him closer to a truth that would turn that afternoon of humiliation into something much greater than anyone present could have imagined. As he removed the last damaged component, Walter realized that he wasn't just facing prejudice. He was uncovering a crime. And when you spend decades building perfect machines, you learn that every imperfection has a source, every break tells a story, and every lie leaves traces that are impossible to erase. 45 years, Walter said softly, his hands still working on the engine with surgical precision. That's how long I spent creating engines like this one in Maranello, Italy. The word Maranello caused absolute silence. Even the people filming lowered their cell phones. Maranello was the world headquarters of Ferrari, the place where only the best engineers in the world were allowed to work. "Impossible," Ryan muttered, but his voice had lost all its previous arrogance. Walter smiled and removed a specific metal plate from the engine. Serial number F209WJ447. The initials WJ are no coincidence. Walter Johnson. I personally designed this engine in March 2019. The blood drained completely from Blackwell's face. He tried to speak, but only an incoherent noise came out of his throat. "Mr. Blackwell," Walter continued, now looking directly at him. "Would you like to explain how an engine I designed to be fail-safe suffered an accident that damaged the exact 3 components that would yield the largest insurance payout?" Rebecca slowly approached, her heart pounding. She finally understood why her grandfather had accepted that humiliation without resistance. He was investigating this engine. Walter lifted a specific part. This was deliberately destroyed using a very specific technique. The injection system was forced to operate at a temperature 40% above the limit for exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Long enough to cause catastrophic damage, but too short to appear accidental to anyone who understands manufacturing. The audience now watched in complete silence. Some began recording again, but this time to capture the revelation, not the humiliation. "You can't prove any of this," Blackwell shouted, finally regaining his voice. "It's the word of a black man?" Walter calmly finished. "You're right. It would just be my word against yours." He smiled and removed his cell phone from his pocket. "Fortunately, it's not." Walter held up his phone screen to the camera of someone who was still filming. "I just sent a message to Lorenzo Benedetti, current director of engineering at Ferrari Maranello, along with detailed photos of this engine and my technical analysis of the sabotage." Walter's phone began to ring. "May I take this?" "It's Maranello." Walter answered and put it on speakerphone. "Hello, Lorenzo." "Walter, Dio mio, I just saw your photos, the Italian accented voice echoed across the dealership courtyard. Questo è impossibile. That's the engine you designed for American customer Blackwell, isn't it? What was it doing in an accident? Exactly my question, Lorenzo, Walter replied, his eyes fixed on Blackwell. Especially considering that this engine has a safety device that I designed specifically to prevent the types of failures that supposedly caused this accident. Walter, my friend, are you recording this? I need this to get to our legal department immediately. That Ferrari was sold with fraudulent insurance. Blackwell tried to move closer to turn off the phone, but Walter gently moved away. There's more, Lorenzo. The current owner claims that 5 different mechanics have declared this engine irreparable. Ridiculous. You designed this engine to run for 500,000 kilometers without major maintenance. If someone said it's beyond repair, they're either incompetent or lying. At this point, Rebecca finally approached. Grandpa Walter, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Do you need help? The silence that followed was deafening. Blackwell looked from Rebecca to Walter, finally making the connection that would destroy him completely. Your granddaughter works here, Blackwell stammered. For 2 years, Rebecca replied firmly. And in all that time, I've heard your jokes about people like my grandfather. People who, according to you, don't understand real cars. Walter hung up the phone after saying goodbye to Lorenzo and addressed Blackwell directly. Sir, for 45 years, I designed 847 different engines for Ferrari. I trained hundreds of engineers. I received 23 international awards for automotive innovation. And today, at 72, I retired to be close to my family. He paused and looked around at the audience, who were now watching in absolute silence. But I have also learned that some engines, no matter how perfect they are sabotaged by people who value money more than integrity. You can't prove that Blackwell began desperately. Actually, I can. Walter showed his cell phone again. Because while you were enjoying humiliating an old man who doesn't understand cars, I recorded our entire conversation, including your admission about the insurance payment. Blackwell's face turned into a mask of pure terror. In his arrogance, he had commented on receiving $2.3 million in insurance money for a totally irreparable Ferrari. And since we're talking about recordings, Walter continued, I imagine the insurance company will be very interested to know that the accident that cost them millions was, in fact, intentional sabotage documented by the engine's creator himself. Blackwell began to visibly shake. His real estate empire, built in part on fraudulent insurance money, was about to collapse. Worse still, his arrogance had been recorded and broadcast live to hundreds of people. Mr. Walter, said one of the customers who had been filming. Can I post this on my social media? The world needs to see this. Walter nodded kindly. Of course, but do me a favor. Post this, too. He walked over to the Ferrari's engine and, with precise movements that showed decades of experience, began to reconnect it. In less than 10 minutes, the engine that 5 mechanics had declared irreparable came back to life with a perfect, powerful roar. The sound of the Ferrari engine echoed across the courtyard like a symphony of justice. Meanwhile, Blackwell stood frozen, watching not only his fraud exposed, but also his arrogance humiliated by the man he had tried to belittle. Rebecca approached her grandfather and whispered, How did you know it was the engine you had designed? Walter smiled softly. Honey, when you create something with your own hands, you recognize your work, even in the wreckage. Just as you recognize when someone tries to destroy it on purpose. As the engine continued to run perfectly, a single question hung in the air. What would happen when the insurance company, Ferrari Corporate, and the authorities received the recordings that were being sent at that very moment to dozens of different addresses? 3 weeks later, Walter Johnson sat in the FBI office in Los Angeles, watching agents review hundreds of documents spread out on a huge table. His casual recording of an afternoon of humiliation had become the centerpiece of a federal investigation into insurance fraud involving multiple companies and millions of dollars. "Mr. Johnson," said Agent Martinez, looking over her glasses, "your technical analysis was crucial. We discovered that Blackwell Corporation defrauded insurance companies of at least 17 luxury vehicles over the past 5 years, always using the same sabotage technique you identified." Walter nodded calmly. At 72, he had learned that patience was a more powerful virtue than anger. "And Mr. Blackwell himself," Agent Martinez continued, "arrested yesterday morning, resisting arrest, attempted bribery, obstruction of justice, and fraud on multiple counts. He'll be out of society for a long time." The agent smiled. Apparently, when he realized his bank accounts were being frozen, he tried to offer $200,000 to the investigator who was at his home. Meanwhile, across town, Rebecca Johnson had been promoted to general manager of the dealership after the former owner had his assets seized by the government. The company had been sold to a group of investors who valued integrity over appearances, and the first decision they made was to put a person of character in charge. "Grandpa Walter," Rebecca said on the phone, "you won't believe it. That salesman Ryan who mocked you so much came to me today to apologize. He said that since the video went viral, he hasn't been able to sleep properly." The video in question had surpassed 15 million views across all platforms, not only Walter's humiliation and subsequent triumph, but mainly the lesson about never judging someone by their appearance. Hundreds of retired engineers from Ferrari, Mercedes, BMW, and other automakers had shared their own stories of prejudice they faced after retiring. Lorenzo Benedetti had personally flown from Maranello to Los Angeles to meet with Walter. The meeting, which was supposed to be private, ended up becoming a public ceremony when the Ferrari Corporation decided to officially honor one of its most brilliant engineers. "Walter, my friend," Lorenzo said before an audience of journalists and automotive enthusiasts, "Ferrari owes a lot to men like you. Your dedication, precision, and integrity have shaped not only our engines, but our worldwide reputation." The company announced the creation of the Walter Johnson Scholarship, a program that would fully fund engineering studies for young people from disadvantaged communities who demonstrated talent and passion for mechanics. The first class would have 10 students, aged 16 to 22, all selected on merit, not family connections. But perhaps the most significant change took place in the community where Walter lived. After decades of working quietly in his garage, repairing neighbors' cars for nominal fees, he had become an almost mythical figure. Young people from the area began seeking him out to learn mechanics. And Walter discovered a new passion: teaching. The difference, Walter explained to his new students as they worked on an engine, between a good mechanic and an exceptional mechanic is not in the tools they use. It's in the patience to understand each component and the respect for the work they are doing. Marcus, a 17-year-old whose father had abandoned the family, became Walter's most dedicated pupil. "Mr. Johnson," he asked one day, "how did you stay so calm when that man was humiliating you?" Walter smiled, his hands still working precisely and smoothly on the engine. "Marcus, I've learned one thing in 72 years of life: people who need to put others down to feel important have already revealed everything you need to know about them. True strength isn't in responding in the moment. It's in building something so solid that not even 1,000 mean words can destroy it." Meanwhile, Jonathan Blackwell faced a very different reality. His real estate empire had completely collapsed when investigations revealed that multiple projects had been financed with fraudulent insurance money. In addition to prison, he lost his mansion, luxury cars, yacht, and, most painfully, the respect of anyone who had ever admired him. Videos of his public humiliation circulated constantly on social media, always accompanied by comments about the importance of treating all people with dignity. His arrogance, captured in high definition, became a case study in business schools about how a lack of character can destroy an empire in a matter of days. Ryan, the salesman who had mocked Walter, sought out not only Rebecca, but Walter himself to apologize in person. The meeting took place in the garage where Walter now taught, surrounded by young apprentices of all ethnicities and social classes. "Mr. Johnson," Ryan said, visibly embarrassed, "I know my words were inexcusable. I have no right to your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I've learned a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." Walter stopped what he was doing and looked directly at Ryan. "Son, we've all judged someone by their appearance at some point. The difference is in what we do when we realize our mistake. You're here, apologizing, trying to grow as a person. That's more than many would do." He extended his hand, greasy but firm. "If you really want to redeem yourself, come help teach these young people about honest sales. They'll need to know how to deal with customers when they open their own shops." Ryan's transformation was remarkable. He began attending Walter's classes regularly, not only helping with sales knowledge, but learning about humility and respect. 6 months later, he would be promoted in the dealership's new management, this time on genuine merit, not flattery. The Ferrari that Walter had repaired became a permanent attraction at the dealership, now renamed Johnson Premium Motors. A plaque next to the vehicle told the full story of that transformative day, serving as a constant reminder to employees and customers of the importance of never underestimating anyone. During the grand opening ceremony for the new dealership, Walter was invited to speak to an audience that included mayors, business leaders, and journalists. His speech, simple and direct as always, resonated far beyond that event. "For 45 years, I built engines that took people to the farthest corners of the world," Walter said into the microphone, his voice calm, but laden with experience. "Today, I realize that the most important engine I can help build is the next generation, young people who will understand that true success comes not from diminishing others, but from elevating oneself through honest work and dignity." The audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation that lasted more than 5 minutes. Among those present were dozens of other retired professionals, doctors, engineers, teachers, artisans, who had faced similar prejudice after leaving their careers. Walter's story had become a symbol of resistance and dignity for an entire generation that refused to be invisible. Inspired by this incredible journey? Subscribe to Storysphere for more stories of triumph over adversity. 6 months later, the Walter Johnson Scholarship had grown to 50 students, funded not only by Ferrari, but by donations from people around the world who were inspired by his story. The program expanded to include not only automotive mechanics, but aeronautical, naval, and renewable energy engineering. Marcus, the young man who had asked about patience, was accepted into the California Institute of Technology on a full scholarship, carrying with him the lessons he learned in Walter's garage about persistence, respect, and excellence. In his acceptance letter, he wrote, "I have learned that true knowledge comes with humility, and that the greatest honor is to use your skills to lift others." Last week, Walter received an unexpected letter. It was from Jonathan Blackwell, written from prison. The letter, respectful and genuinely remorseful, asked for forgiveness and acknowledged that that day at the dealership had exposed not only his financial fraud, but his moral bankruptcy. He had finally understood that true wealth was never in his material possessions, but in the respect a person builds through their actions. Walter responded to the letter with the same dignity that had always characterized his actions. He did not offer easy forgiveness, but he recognized the courage it took to admit such profound mistakes. "The first step in rebuilding a life," Walter wrote, "is to fully acknowledge the damage we have caused. The second is to devote the rest of our days to repairing the damage through actions, not words." Today, at 73, Walter Johnson wakes up every morning knowing that his life has a renewed purpose. His garage school is visited by engineers from around the world, all wanting to meet the man who turned a moment of humiliation into a movement of global inspiration. Rebecca often watches her grandfather teach and reflects on how a single day changed not only their lives, but the lives of hundreds of people around the world. "Grandpa," she said recently, "did you know this was going to happen when you accepted his challenge?" Walter smiled, his hands still precise even after decades of work. Honey, I've learned that when you live your life with integrity, you don't need to plan revenge. Life takes care of putting each person in their rightful place. Walter Johnson's story proved that the best revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you. It is to build something so extraordinary that their opinion becomes completely irrelevant. He turned decades of silent prejudice into a force that changed lives, proved that true greatness never depends on skin color, age, or bank account, and showed that a man of integrity can defeat any empire built on lies. And if you also believe that dignity always wins over arrogance, that knowledge overcomes prejudice, and that one determined person can change the world one life at a time, don't forget to subscribe to StorySphere for more stories that prove, in the end, justice always finds a way to prevail.